Well, welcome to the next to last, I guess, panel of this very good conference. Deputy Secretary of State Steinberg will be speaking around noon after we finish and have another coffee break. This conference features many coffee breaks. It's a very important aspect of these conferences. It's a great pleasure for me personally to be able to ask a few questions and draw on the wisdom of President José Maria Aznar, whom I got to know when he was Prime Minister, President of Spain, which he was for 8 years, from 1996 to 2004, 8 years in which Spain's economy turned around and really made huge progress. Economically, 8 years in which Spain was a great ally of the United States, first with President Clinton and then with President Bush. I actually saw President Bush last week, and he mentioned President Aznar as one of the really staunchest allies in the war on terror and in the efforts after September 11th. Spain, of course, also has suffered directly from terrorist attacks right at the time of the election in 2004, of course. And so it's really a great personal honor to be here with President Aznar. He now teaches at Georgetown University and is on many boards and involved with many international organizations. About 6-7 months ago, he was the key person in the founding of the Friends of Israel initiative, which has taken off in a very big way. And I'll ask him about that a little later, an attempt to rally Europeans and Americans and Asians to the defense of Israel around the world. But let me begin I was just talking with President Aznar outside, and he commented that this is such an interesting moment in world politics. You travel everywhere, you see world leaders, Chancellor Merkel and President Sarkozy, and of course others. What do you take? Are you optimistic about the moment? I mean, what strikes you about the current moment in world history?
Well, thank you very much for your introduction, Bill, and thank you very much for your presentation. Thank you very much to you all you present this morning, and congratulations for this initiative. This is very important and very interesting. Well, my feeling is a feeling of I am concerned about the evolution of the important things in the world. No? It's not a question of to be optimistic or pessimistic, but to be realistic that the world changes, and it changes very, very spectacular. It's very impressive. And even the consequences of the fall of the Berlin Wall changes dramatically and quickly. And we're looking at a new power that emerged extremely strong. Is all the continent, Asia continent, and especially China, maybe India. With us that the unipolar wall based in the power of the United States after the collapse of the Soviet Union changed to share this power with another emerging countries. We look in the emergence of a huge middle class everywhere in the world that establishes enormous pressure with natural resources, with energy questions, and that trying to have a way of life, the same way of life, the same income per capita that the most rich country in the world. And the consequence of the economic crisis will be a consequences that will be winners and losers, and affect strategically, economically, culturally. We have the problems of the terrorism, the proliferation, and so on. But there is a positive fact. It is globalization is unstoppable. Globalization is a great opportunity. There is not alternative for democracy, for democratic system. There is not alternative for a freedom economy. And we are in the middle of the very important cultural struggle, cultural battle, with the result will be maybe different in one sense from another sense.
Let's go around the world.
Okay.
Since you've given us such a good overview, Europe. There's an economic crisis in Europe, and there's also a question of political will in Europe, with European governments pulling out, of course, of Iraq, in the case of Spain after you left office, but now even Afghanistan, which was the war that people supported in Europe, even if they didn't support Iraq. Do you think Europe has or will find again the political will to be a strong partner for the US? And what about the economic future?
My idea is that the future of Europe has to be extremely linked with the United States. And we must devote a lot of our efforts of activities and reinforce the Western values. Politically, economically, in terms of security, and culturally. But the situation is the opposite in this moment. No? There's not exactly a break in the United States and Europe, but Europe is not already a problem for the United States. This is not a problem. But it's not a solution. And what is Europe? This is not a problem, it's not a solution. The problem for Europe is to do nothing. Europe declining, demographically declining, the influence of Europe in the world declining. Institutionally, the institutions that forge the European Union are less important, and the influence of some countries, as Germany, other countries, is most important. Even another multilateral organization as NATO is less important, and the agreements, bilateral agreements in some countries is more important. And United States looking Asia, not looking Europe. This is for us a complicated situation. If you can add this landscape the consequences of the economic crisis. In my view, the consequence of the economic crisis will be maybe a great difference between the countries in North Europe and the countries in the South Europe. And all the concept of that force of the European Union can be changed in this moment. This is one of the reasons because I believe that for our interests, reinforce our alliance with the United States is basic. Reinforce the Atlantic values is basic for our interests. Secondly, economically, today United States and Europe represent 40% of the global economy, of the world economy. If you act with agreement among us, it's possible to have a level of influence in the world most important. But if we continue with this disagreement, we repeat some of others, very, very concerns in my view. This is the last meeting in Seoul, the G20. This is a very serious failure for our interests, very serious failure for American leadership, very serious failure for the world.
How worried are you about the Obama administration? I mean, what would you recommend they do vis-a-vis Europe? I mean, are they doing enough? Are they reaching out to the right people? Is there enough coordination of policy in economics or in other aspects of foreign policy?
Well, as you know very well, I am not a special enthusiastic supporter of President Obama.
Right. Yes.
I respect, but it's not my ideal president.
Right.
But finally, administration and presidents are facts. And the American people believing that the facts is not bad facts, no good facts. No. But as you know very well, most of Europeans consider themselves as more supporters of Obama than American supporters of Obama. The problem for them in this moment is looking at Obama. for Obama, Europe is not interesting.
Yeah.
It's not a priority for Obama. This is the first time the Europeans feeling that for the American president, especially after the First or the Second World War, Europe is not a priority. Sure, this is not a problem. This is not an important part of the solution. For important part of the solution of the forge, the world of the future is most important Asia than Europe. And this is one of the important reasons, because in the interest of Europe is to reinforce the alliance with the United States. And the second, a lot of Europeans thinking that that Mr. Obama is not an American president. It can be a European president. This is a mistake for them. And now he living in a moment of confusion. And the disagrees in economic terms, for instance, between some European powers of the European Union and the United States, some years ago are unthinkable. If you remember, for instance, the meetings of G8, the G8 is expression. The alliance between Europe and the United States is expression of the predominance of the Atlantic world. But the G8 does not exist. So the West is pulled out in this sense. The G20. In G20, the divergence of views is absolutely total. And I think this is a problem for the leadership of the United States in the world. And I consider that the leadership of the United States in the world is indispensable. I consider that this country is an indispensable country, and only the United States can do the job that is the responsibility of the leader of the world. Just not in the same terms that 10 years ago, or 15 years ago, or 20 years ago, but without this leadership is absolutely indispensable. But I'm looking, and politically, leadership is, in my opinion, weak. Economically, is a very serious problem. I consider that the current economic American policy is a huge mistake, And in terms of security, we depend. I think it depends, but it's necessary to send some message that the power, the force, in the good sense of the United States, and the presence of the United States is necessary to maintain. I hear every day that one day to organize a pull-out of the troops in Afghanistan, another day what is the policy of the United States? To eliminate the presence of the country in everywhere. It is not possible if you like to maintain the capacity to be the leader in the world.
If President Obama shows strength on Afghanistan at the NATO summit on Friday, if he reinforces that we're not getting out, despite that July 2011 date, do you think European nations will stay? Will Britain, I know you've seen Prime Minister Cameron some. Do you think Britain will stay? Do you think Spain will stay? There was talk about your successor, President Zapatero, possibly pulling out, but I think that's not happening.
I think people, if an agreement in an expectative, there is expectation of the thing change in Afghanistan, it is possible for Europeans to take favorable decisions to support the American administration in some decisions. Not to send more troops, or to do this is impossible. If you're looking, for example, for instance, the military agreement between the United Kingdom and France is very relevant about this, our problems in Europe. But I think it's necessary to put on the table a clear project to win in Afghanistan. And I think it is possible. But to win, you need several things. The will to win. This is very important, but this is the will to win, and what to means to win, and to define very well what means exactly you win. That is not only eliminate the power of Taliban. In this sense, the victory is happened 9 years ago, but trying to organize a country for the future.
You mentioned the agreement between the United Kingdom and France to share defense assets, I guess. I was very struck reading about that because 10 years ago, everyone was saying Europe, EU was the future, and the defense force would be organized Europe-wide. There would be a European defense force, and now we have a bilateral agreement between Britain and France, which doesn't seem to be a European agreement. What does that say about Europe?
The problem is that we have in few years ago, some people, one of them, my friend Tony Blair and me, we share the same idea. How is it possible to improve the situation in Europe and the world? And we said, with the economy, we must transform Europe in the most important economy in the world. This is way beginning in 2000, but in this economic way is a political decision. But another people they disagree. We must concentrate it in the institutional debates. Well, we organize a lot of time during years of institutional debates, perfectly useless. And now we have a president of the European Council, a president of the Commission, a president of the Parliament, a minister of Foreign Affairs. Well, the problem is not to have a minister of Foreign Affairs. The problem is, what is the policy? How is the policy? No, how is the minister? How is the policy? As the president of the council, what did you do? Cutting ribbons? Chair meetings? This is absurd. This is a problem of policies. It's the lack of policies. It's very bad for the European institutions in this moment. One example is this agreement. The two more relevant questions, apart the question of security, to share some defensive instruments or tools, is there is not mention of the European Union in this agreement, but above all, there is no mention to NATO in this agreement. It's from the idea of the United Kingdom, less from the idea of France, but France back on the military structure of the NATO the last year. It's unthinkable some years ago, and it's an expression of the weakness, in my view, in this moment of this multilateral organization as in defensive terms with his NATO. I think that is the next summit in Lisbon. If the American administration of President Obama is aware of this situation, it's an opportunity not to approve a new strategic concept about NATO that is a continuity of nothing. That is to take some decisions. We must reinforce seriously the values and the institution of based on the Western world as our basic policy to challenge the future with a possibility to leadership and victory.
It's very interesting. Let me ask you about Latin America, because you worked very closely, you have great expertise in Latin America. You did a lot as President of Spain, obviously in Latin America, and you worked closely with President Bush on Latin American policy. I know this was not reported so much, but you two coordinated, I think, many of the efforts to strengthen relations with nations in Latin America and to strengthen the pro-Western forces in Latin America. What is your sense of the current situation with Chavez and Venezuela and Brazil? And
Let me say on a little anecdote, because it is true that President Bush, for instance, are very interested in Latin America. Unfortunately for all of us, after September 11, well, the world changed, the situation changed, the priorities changed. No? But, for example, in December 2002, during a lunch at White House with President Bush, 3 months before the invasion of Iraq, President Bush devoted all the lunch, more or less 1 hour and a half, 30, to looking with me and talking to me one by one, all the American countries, one by one. Another Uruguay, then another Argentina, and then Chile, and then one by one. And this is very, very interesting, very important, because it's the expression of concern, but the expression of really of interest. In this moment, in my view, the problem of this continent, of this region, is the possibility to be divided. And the countries that defend our way of life, our democratic system, our freedoms, very strong allies for us, and the countries that are trying to organize an alternative to the United States and the Western values. The second are Cuba, Venezuela, and Bolivia, and maybe Ecuador or Nicaragua, these countries. There are other countries in a very complicated ground, with this Argentina, very strong allies with Colombia or Peru or Chile. But these 2 countries especially important. One is Brazil. When you talk about Latin America around the world, everywhere, only a Spaniard, as me, is concerned for all Latin America. But the rest, looking and thinking in Brazil. And the rest are satellites around Brazil. For me, the great maybe will be possible an agreement. This agreement will recognize not only the right to Israel to exist, to guarantee absolutely, totally the security of Israel. We must always think that Israel is the only democracy in the region, is our democracy, is our allies, our friend. But this agreement not avoid the Iranian threat or the Islamist jihadism. Jihadism, terrorism, and the Iranian threat will continue with agreement or without agreement, but especially more if it is necessary with agreement. And anyway, I think it is an opportunity, but to do a regional agreement, well, to maintain this capacity to Israel to live in security and peace.
And Iran, what do you think happens?
I don't know exactly what is the situation about the situation of the nuclear program in Iran. I don't know exactly what is the intelligence that the Western countries have about Iran. But I only think if Iran becomes a nuclear power, will be an enormous problem for all of us. Not for we think strategically, politically. Some people tell me, But this is Iran is irrelevant. The bomb is irrelevant because never use the bomb against the other, because the other used the bomb against the one. Well, but you establish a wall with a race of nuclear proliferation, and 30, 35 states with a bomb will be extremely complicated to manage this. The possibility to have terrorist weapons of nuclear weapons in terrorist hands will be most important. The capacity of the United States, or maybe another country, but especially the United States, to guarantee stability and freedom in the world will be more complicated. No? The balance of the power in the Muslim world will be extremely different. No? And this is not a normal regime. What do you define? How is it possible to define the Iran regime? It's a rogue state, but it's possible. This is a not rogue state, but it's possible to have a great deal with Iran in this moment. This is a temptation from some people in this country, or for some people in Europe. I reject this idea. But this idea will be enormous, an enormous mistake for our interests and for the future of the world in terms of freedom, of peace, of security.
And do you think the European leaders, which do not unfortunately include you now and do not include Prime Minister Blair, do you think the European leaders agree, the current leadership, Merkel and Sarkozy and Cameron and others, that a nuclear Iran is just unacceptable?
I don't know. Maybe Sarkozy, yes. Sarkozy, yes. I don't know the rest. I don't know the rest, really. But Cameron is extremely concentrated, but I can guess that yes, that Cameron continued the policy of the United Kingdom. Whether the Merkel not be, this is very interesting, the new role of Germany in Europe. No? With Merkel, wouldn't be an obstacle. No? It's very interesting looking again that the less influence of the European Union is the most important influence of Germany inside Europe. Extremely important. And this economic crisis is the confirming this tendency, that the possibilities to act individually out of the European Union for Germany, even for other countries, but especially for Germany, will be more important in the future. It was very interesting to follow this idea.
That's very interesting. And do you think how does this play out now over a year or two?
The problem is in this moment there is not an alternative game in the European Union, because in times of, in another time with some friends, it is possible to organize some alternative plays in games in the European Union. No? One of the most important expression of this was in times of in 2003 with the Iraqi crisis, no? With the most important, but there is non-existent this moment in Europe, no? Unfortunately. No? This focus of the influence of the possibilities to act individually, especially for this country.
That's an interesting question. I mean, I think you've really raised interesting questions about the future of Europe and the future of NATO. And I hadn't, in myself, reading about the French-British agreement, it didn't occur to me till you said it that isn't this the kind of thing NATO is supposed to exist for? How worried are you that NATO is a thing of the past, really?
I proposed some years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, a huge transformation of NATO, and to transform NATO in a global organization, and to accept a member of NATO, some countries around the world, as Australia or Japan, or even a special relationship with India, even Israel if it's necessary. No? And to transform the idea of NATO and to focus the action of NATO in the fighting against terror. But then, whether some people agree, but to do nothing. No? And I think for Europe is extremely dangerous, this. I don't understand the future of Europe without talking the future of NATO. And I consider this indispensable to preserve the future of NATO and to express the future of NATO with more decision that in this moment. But it's a very important decision and responsibility for American administration, because we, some European countries, can ask. We, some former leaders, we can talk speaking about this. But the capacity of decision of looking this idea is especially the expression of American leadership. NATO is aspiration to exercise in the good sense, in the right path, in the democracy terms, the leadership of the United States.
And Europe, on the economic front, how do you think we are past the worst of the crisis, or?
No, not past the worst of the crisis, but continuing the crisis. But I think the political consequences in Europe will be this. There are a division in the countries of the north of Europe and the countries of the south of Europe. And this is a problem. This is a problem for the European Union. And there will be a very important consequence, political consequences. And obviously economic consequences. Today we have two countries in very serious. One country under intervention is Greece. Another country is, with Ireland and Portugal, is almost. And the rest of the other countries too, with Spain and maybe Italy exist. Well, this is one of the question. Another question is the European idea that to live in crisis is necessary to recover discipline, to recover more stability budgets, not fall in a war of devalued currencies, not fall in protectionism. I support this idea. I think in this idea, the discipline Germans are right. And I consider that trying to combat deficit with more deficit, debt with more debt, lack of trust with more lack of trust is a very bad way. And this is one of the reasons because I am very, very criticist with the decision of American administration. To devaluate dollar, it is absurd. And to devaluate dollar to gain competitiveness for lack of confidence of the investors in American economy is a serious problem. But about all the mentality, here I can say the most important consequence of the most important agreement in the meeting of Seoul, the G20, is that there is not agreement. This is the more relevant agreement. Well, maybe it's better, I don't know. But the position of the United States is not the position to exert leadership. Looking, it's not a position to leadership to say, we propose to eliminate in the trade, eliminate surpluses or deficit, or put limited surpluses or deficit. The question is why? But what is the sense of this? This is absurd. If you are a competitive economy, you can't have surplus and trade, or the opposite. It is absolutely, in my view, absolutely absurd. But if you attend this meeting and say, you are guilty of our situation, all your countries in the world are guilty of the situation of the United States. Why? Mm-hmm. why? You can say, well, the yuan for China, well, the yuan for China, maybe it's a problem, the yuan for China. The Japanese or the other countries or the emerging countries? I said, no, why? I consider that this is an expression of a policy that generates confusion, but this is not expression exactly of the leadership. Some people, as you know very well, consider that the leadership is arrive in a city, sitting on the table and say, this is the question. It is not more time, finished. No, this is not leadership. The exercise of leadership is different, no? But the basis of this decision on an American economy are very complicated. And I think in Europe for the future to establish this idea of the discipline and to recover discipline and to recover some countries for discipline, pay a price. Obviously pay a price. But health in terms of macroeconomic terms, in terms of our power of the economy, will be better.
Well, this has been a wonderful tour d'horizon of the world and really a demonstration, I think, of why you have been so highly respected as a world leader. You've educated us on economics and politics and security. And we really appreciate your coming here to join us today.
Thank you very
very
much,
busy
yeah.
schedule, and we appreciate everything you're doing, really. You're not a former leader, you're a present leader in the debate on foreign policy and in the effort to have a strong and vibrant and powerful Western alliance that advances Western values around the world. So thank you for everything.
Thank you very
you've done.
much. Thank you very much.